Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to join by Susan Beale. She's on Cape Cod at the moment, but she actually lives in Amsterdam, a globetrotter. So welcome to the show, Susan.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Susan is an adoptee. We're from a similar era, mid to late 60s. But if I remember correctly from what you said this morning, Susan, adoption wasn't really a thing for you until the birth of your first son, right? That was when it really kicked off, or I don't know. How would you describe it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it wasn't a thing for me. I always knew I was adopted. We talked about it a lot. I knew a lot of other adoptees in my community when I was growing up. And it was sort of I don't know, our unique selling point, if you're going to use a marketing term for it. It just was kind of part of the brand. But the first thing about my adoption that when it really hit me was the birth of my son. When after however many hours of back labor, and he finally emerged in his snotty glory, but coughed and sneezed, and I just realized I was staring at a genetic relative. And I don't think that I wasn't expecting for that to be such a huge thing, but here was this person to whom I was not only related, but genetically related as well. And that was huge for me. That was huge.
And so what, it was huge as in, wow, I never thought of this before, or wow, this is bigger than I thought it was, or, what?
Well, yeah, probably yes, both. It was huge for me that it felt so profound, that it had been important to me to do this, and that I had never really thought before about not being genetically related to my family, the family I knew. And it just also led me, to think of the woman who carried me to term, and all of the things that I was feeling as a pregnant person. She must have felt as well, those changes in the body, the movement of the baby within you, and that was that person out there, and I had no idea who she was.
Wow. There's so much there. I guess the first thing is the USP and the brand and the way you say it. It's a positive thing, right? And who's out there flying the flag that it's a positive thing? Let me do a little bit more of that. That's great. Love that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do think that it depends. I never felt personally the stigma that there was anything to be embarrassed about. I think there are many who weren't as sort of ready to talk about it as I was, and it didn't. I don't know. I didn't shy from it at all. I was a little shocked, at certain points in my life. I think at one point I had a boyfriend who had a younger brother who was preparing for confirmation, or I don't know, they were Catholic, and they were in catechism, who explained to me that I was a mortal sin, and I recall that I found that funny, and that he would think that. But my boyfriend was very upset at his brother for saying such things. So yeah, that was the closest that I got to being shamed and shunned at the time. But
Catholic guilt is a funny thing. I went to the Vatican. We went to Rome. Been to Rome a few times, but I went with some friends, and they wanted to go to the Vatican, and I wasn't particularly bothered anyway. But I went along, not to be a killjoy. And I saw a queue of people waiting to kiss a statue's big toe. and there was a Swiss guard. So so the Pope's got an army.
Yeah, yeah.
Why
Yeah.
does the Pope
I've
need
been
an
to the
army?
Vatican. I've
Question
seen,
mark.
yeah,
Yeah. Question
yeah,
mark. Why does the Pope need an army? That's
yeah.
interesting.
Well, it was a while ago.
It's one. And the Swiss guard was stood by the statue that the people were waiting to kiss, and I thought, this isn't. I had some negative thoughts, shall we say, towards this what I saw unfolding in front of me, and the Swiss guard guy saw my criticism. Let's just put it that way. He saw the criticism. I've got quite an open face, so people can tell how I'm feeling, right? And he saw my criticism, look of criticism on my face, and gave me a death stare back, which I thought was very. I don't know whether the Swiss army, the Swiss guard are religious people, but yes, Catholic sin. That's
Well,
to me,
yeah,
as a non-Catholic.
yeah, no, probably. I mean, I do think that pretty much the shame of the for adoptees, which is, I mean, it all gets back to premarital sex, doesn't it? In almost all the cases, or illicit sex, unsanctioned by the church. I think pretty much everybody has had, pretty much all religions have had a thing or two to say about it, and none of it's good. The products, if you look through literature and stuff, the products of the affairs, they're never the characters of the they're always the secretive, vengeful characters, who are coming back. So there's plenty of it in cinema. I have no idea why I had the thoughts I had about adoption, but
we take this on, right? We take this on to a certain extent, do we? The shame stuff. Some of us do.
Well, I think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people, and depending on the society and the support group around you, I mean, people can certainly make you feel bad about something. But it's horrible, because you have no control over how none of us had any control about how we came into the world. It's not our fault. And I thought, part of the whole evolution of man in society is that the sins of the fathers are not visited upon the children. So we're supposed to have outgrown that, but people like to have something to look down upon others for. Yes. So.
Yeah. So I'm just having a coughing fit, ladies and gentlemen. I have a mute button. Why don't I use it? The other thing that popped into my head was something you said this morning, is that there were quite a lot of adoptees around you and within your network and within your family's network growing up, and I thought that must have been a normalizing factor for you.
I think it was. If I'd been, I don't know if I would have felt the same way if I had been the only adoptee that I knew. But I, for other people, I'd once tried to think of all the other adoptees that I had known growing up, and I easily got close to 24. So that's a lot, isn't it? I mean, they weren't all people that were in my class. It's not like we had a class full of adoptees or anything, but they were, in different parts of my life, friends of friends and other people that I knew from. I was a competitive figure skater in the day, and I knew some of other skaters that I knew. They were adopted. They didn't live in my town, but I just knew them, or I knew, of them from that. Yeah. So it was, it was the baby scoop. I mean, it's the height of the baby scoop era, isn't it? So there were something like, I think over the whole of is it 1 million, 1.5 million? I mean, it's a ridiculous number of adoptees who were placed in there. So if those are the numbers that, over those decades, then, it's not surprising that we were a dime a dozen, there were a lot of us.
I knew a couple of lads at school that were adopted. I think I knew who they were. I didn't know them. There's 1,000 kids at the school. I've mentioned this before. I think I went to a friend of mine's. It was either his 18th or his 21st birthday. I think it was his 21st birthday party, and his girlfriend was there, and she was. It came up how it came up in the conversation that she was adopted. We were both having. I think we were both having a cigarette outside. Outside the event of the thing. I was a smoker in those days, and it was the first person that I'd really spoken to about it, and it was a kind of a breath of fresh air. And she was very pretty, but
okay.
She was going out with my friend, so I was a gentleman, and she probably didn't fancy me anyway. But I didn't.
You'll never know. You'll never know.
Never know. Yeah, she was. Yeah, but it was the conversation, and the conversation was great as well. One of the things that you said earlier on when we spoke is that you sometimes felt that you go from 0 to 60 in 5. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we were talking about adoption and the trauma of it, of being removed from your from your from your mother. There's no other mother at that stage, and as an infant, I mean, that was the practice, and I believe that what they thought was that you wouldn't get attached. I know that my birth mother was told she'd be better off not looking at me, and certainly not picking me up, so that she never got attached, which was ridiculous because, of course, she already was attached. But then, it was also that it would be best for the baby. But what did they do? They took the baby, and then they put the baby, maybe nurses looked after the baby in those first, few days after birth. And then I went off to I was in a foster home for, I think, 6 weeks, maybe longer. But I certainly not more than 2 months. But so then I might have bonded. I don't know what that case was. We have a list of things that my schedule from that time. So I don't know anything more about
pooing? It. Did the schedule involve pooing?
Yeah, I don't know. They didn't talk about my schedule. It was very regimented. There was when I slept, there were talks about that I would play in my chair or something. I do not know how much playing I was actually doing. What the definition was. When I slept, how many ounces of formula I got. When I had my bath, and I do recall that there was I think baby is responsive to other people, loves to play in her bath, and likes the eye contact with other people. So yeah, I don't know if I've never seen another one of these forms. They slept on my stomach, which you're not allowed to do anymore. Just little bits like that. It was quite detailed and regimented. So I don't know. And then I went to my parents when I was like, the parents I knew for 6 weeks to 2 months or so. And so that's 3 caregivers, maybe more. I don't know how many nurses, which I mean, we don't do that to cats, now. It would be considered unspeakably cruel to do that to an animal. And they thought that was best then. That was the thinking, was that was best for everyone if I had this, if babies were transported from one to another. And so I've been reading some stuff about, the body keeps a score, and all this stuff is pre-verbal. This whole experience, I don't remember it. It is how I started, how my life began. There is no pre-trauma. That's traumatic. There is no pre-trauma me. I don't make too big of a deal out of it because it didn't feel like a trauma, but it is a pretty huge thing for a baby. And so research shows that there must be a trace of that in somewhere. And so I, examine stuff, and there are things that I will go from, as I say, 0 to 60 in 5, where there's like anger / rage, but I think it's something that my body reacts to before my mind does. It's in my lizard brain probably. And when I'm overwhelmed or under pressure, and I I know that what I feel is that there is a problem, and I am entirely responsible for solving what appears in that moment to be unsolvable, and it is a feeling in which I think that what comes out as anger is actually really, for me, a sense of just, I don't know, helplessness, a sense that I am, no one's coming to save me. And I don't know if I don't want to put, and say, and that's because I'm adopted. I'm not saying it's that at all, but it's a character, I would say, a character flaw of mine that I'm keenly aware of. And I do wonder if that feeling is not this sense of, abandonment, basically.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if I had this conversation with somebody last week, but I don't know whether it was on the podcast or actually just a pre-podcast chat. The abandonment thing. Well, I feel that you mentioned it, cats. I feel it with dogs.
Mm.
And I remember now. I'm not very proud of this actually. I remember being angry at my dog.
Mm.
No, I'm really not proud about this at all. When she was settling in, because she was disturbing my sleep.
Okay.
Because she was, barking.
Mm.
That feels horrible. That sense of being that sense of being alone, that crying baby, or the crying puppy, or the and that it hit. I was watching a wildlife show, and these Arctic wolves were chasing bison, and and they got. It's a David Attenborough thing, and what's kind of going to happen because the music changes, and and the baby and that the baby, the bison, is going to be in danger, and it's going to be the least.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be the slowest sprinter is going to make it, or may not make it. And have you seen this show called Gogglebox? Have you seen that show?
Yeah, I have seen it. Yeah.
So I don't know whether you have it.
When they show people watching the program and their reaction to it. Yeah.
And they all, when the ill bison, or the lion that doesn't run, or the antelope that doesn't run quite as quickly, or whatever, or the run to the litter, whenever they watch those, the editors, the Gogglebox producers pick very emotional TV programs for the families to watch, and then edit it down to the most emotive bits.
Right, because it's reality television.
It's reality television, so they dial up the emotion. They know that they need to do that, or else we're just going to stay looking at, be flipping on our phones. They don't get our attention. And we all have this reaction. We all feel for the little guy or girl on their own, don't we?
Oh yeah, of course. It's it's a terrible thing. I think it probably, I'm sure it touches all of us at our basis, in our lizard brains. It's the feeling of we are a pack. The humans are pack animals, and to be left alone is it's almost certain death, and it's to be isolated from the pack and it's so there are huge responses for us.
I'm remembering a tear coming to my eye being left out of a rugby club, a rugby team, and also another lad being left out of the swimming team, making the trip to the school that we were running a swimming competition with,
Yeah.
And he was in the squad but didn't get to swim. And I remember seeing him cry. He'd be about 10, I'd be about 12. And what you mentioned earlier on is that when we have these, not, you know, and I have that 0 to 60 in 5. So when you said that, I thought, yeah, I identify with that. I felt that, yeah, daily, weekly, I don't know, a lot. 0 to 16, 0 to 60 in 5. You said that the question that comes to your mind is this adoption related? And you followed that up with very quickly with, I guess we'll never know. It is that. Does that to what extent does that uncertainty drive us nuts?
Well, yeah, it's true. It is unknowable. I mean, and I'm loath to just say, well, it is definitely because I'm adopted. The more I think on it, the more I consider that a possibility, and that so maybe it doesn't really matter if it is or it isn't. If it makes if thinking that oh, this is my body reacting to having been abandoned, you know, for all intents and purposes. We can talk about why, you know, and everything else. But as far as my lizard brain was concerned, I was born ready to meet my mother, and I didn't. So, and there's nothing worse in that for a baby of any kind than to have that happen to it.
And she didn't hold you.
No, she never held me. She did see me at one point, but did not pick me up. Wow. So I can also imagine at one point I heard her voice, and we know babies hear the voices, and yet she didn't pick me up. She just, you know, looked at me in the cot. And you know, for her part, I don't want to. She was a lovely person, and she thought up until until she signed the papers, she thought she was going to be someone was going to, or that my birth father would find a way that we could all stay together. And then after that, she thought maybe her mother would come, you know, to her rescue and help her to, and it wasn't going to happen. So I don't fault her for that. She said that she couldn't pick me up because if she did, she wouldn't have let me go. And so but having said that, you know, an infant doesn't know all those nuances, and it's, as far as they're concerned, they can hear it. Why isn't she not here? Why am I being ignored? So if I think that when I start to feel that, when that reaction starts to happen to me, and I'm still working on this bit, I don't want to give the impression I've got it sorted. But if I get to that point and think, oh, okay, this is me feeling, you know, primal fear of abandonment, and I can step back and rationalize, okay, this is my body reacting to a traumatic memory. What can I do? Am I really by myself? Am I alone in this? Is there someone I can ask to help me? It's you know, it's not against the rules to ask for help. Can I share this with someone? And will that make it better? And when I get to that point where I can actually confess what is, you know, how I'm feeling and what I think it is, it does seem to make me feel much better, very much, you know, very quickly. So at the end of the day, if it works, I don't see a problem using it, you know, because it is unknowable.
Yeah. And it is so much of an unknowable, and I think, you know, trauma compounds, doesn't it? So you've got different bits of it.
Yeah, but it's also when denial is, you know, it does not help. And to try and, you know, and ignore that these are real, that these feelings are real, you know, is very harmful, I think. You know, you have to feel your feelings, and there's nothing illegitimate or wrong about how you feel. You may not be looking at it from a full, you know, 360-degree perspective where you can, you know, take into, you know, rationalize other possible things for what you're feeling, but your feelings are your feelings, and people should hear them and acknowledge them, I think. Yeah. And that goes a long way to making people feel better.
Yeah. Some psychotherapist, it was a Jung or Freud or something, said until we make the subconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate, something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that sounds pretty good.
It sounds pretty good. It's about bringing
I mean,
stuff
not
out.
it's not a good thing, but it sounds pretty true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, my own stuff is so I've had two causes of emotional stuff in my life: business and adoption, right? Running the family business and adoption. So the difference between there was a distinct difference in those two things for me, because if I wasn't good enough at business, I could get better. So I could go on to training courses, right? I could become a better boss. I could become a better salesperson. I could become a better strategist, better, better entrepreneur, more effective, blah, 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 right? But if my low self-worth, and if I was primarily wounded by adoption, then there was nothing I could do. It took me down. It took me down with this, did the primal wound for a while. And luckily I saw through it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's not true that there's nothing that you can do about it. I mean, you can't change the past. You can't change what happened and that sense of it, but you can, I think certainly the first step is talking about it and, facing it, acknowledging it for what it is. And because we've all got it. I mean, if there's nothing to be done with it, then that leaves us all in a pretty fixed,
Yeah, that was my challenge in that moment.
Yeah.
That in that moment, and I don't know how long that moment lasted, right? My life went from a 6 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, and then slipped back a bit reading the primal wound to a 7 out of 10. But I'd had my period in the sun, and now I felt, I'd had my period in the sun, and now I felt I'd been dragged back. And there was a bit of time when I was, I don't say hopeless, but rudderless. I was just feeling a bit. I was feeling a bit. I guess I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself.
Sure. I mean, I think you've said before that that you hadn't really thought much about your adoption until you were 40 and you found, you discovered that the teddy bear, your child teddy bear, was a gift from your birth mother. Which, I mean, for me, I just think that is just heartbreakingly sentimental for me to think that you had that teddy bear, that was the gift from her. For me, that was a sense of just how much she loved you.
Yeah.
And for and yet for you, it sent this sort of, it sounds existential angst, this feeling of I am I was unloved. But it's that probably, it's that for 40 years you were not so much acknowledging that your beginning, basically.
Did you hear the end of the story about what happened when I realized what you just said is true? Did you hear me say that? Have you heard me?
No, I haven't heard that. No.
So you reunited with your birth mum, didn't you? For a while.
18 months I had with her.
Yeah, 18 months. So I didn't, because unfortunately she died. But whatever. So it was 15 years ago, the volcano of eruption, and I think it came at a time when I was really struggling with the business stuff, and I think that was, as I said earlier on, trauma compounds. I think I was in a bad spot, right? I was in a bad spot, and that's why it hit me like it did. I was kind of at the end of my tether.
Sure.
Probably 7-8 years later, I've got it written down somewhere, but I got my adoption file. So, and in the adoption file, there's a letter from my birth mother to the social worker, who she had, the social worker who'd helped, helped. What do we say? So I was, my birth mother gave me away twice, I think. Once to the foster, and then she went to the foster mum and collected me, and on the way, and collected me to take me to the adoption agency, and on the way to the agency, she had wanted to buy me a teddy bear, but the traffic had been bad, so she couldn't do it. So the letter says, the letter says, "Thank you, dear Mrs. Bellis, thank you for your help last Friday," and that she'd wanted to buy me this. She'd wanted David, the name that she gave me, not Simon. That's what my parents gave me. Mum and Dad gave me. She'd wanted to buy a teddy bear, but she hadn't had a chance because the traffic was bad. So could Mrs. Bellis, the social worker, ask my mum and dad if they would accept a bear on her behalf?
Oh, okay. So she asked permission.
She asked permission, and as I read that letter, it was like, I'm sorry, listeners, if you heard this before, because I'm sure I have talked about it, but the tears cascaded down my face as I realized that the teddy bear was a symbol of a love, not a consolation prize.
No, absolutely.
And how wrong I was, and and how wrong I was in that.
But you were wrong. And I don't want to, I don't want to psychoanalyze you. I am not, I'm not a psychologist. But I do try as a writer to be as empathetic and I also like to climb into other people's heads, which I do, for fiction. But it is probably, this was the manifestation of the abandonment, which that you felt as a baby. That was what it was that you were processing, not, and you took it as, well, she didn't love me, that's why she left me with a bear. Which seems, I imagine, so obvious to most people from the outside that is an act of, the purest, most desperate love. And for you, but you weren't ready to hear it because you still had to work through your abandonment. But and I think a lot of us in the baby scoop era are dealing with that, and you can see it online on Twitter, that there's so many people who are around our age that are talking about their adoption and looking back at it and looking at it, because no one was told, the specialists, the experts, assumed that we didn't have any meaning, we would have no memory of this, and we'd be fine, just as long as that we were told honestly that we were adopted, and if provided we were well adjusted, we'd be fine. And I think that was a total crock. Just because we can't verbalize it and we can't access the memory doesn't mean that we didn't feel it and that we didn't. So I think a lot of us are working through and processing our abandonment, and there's no other word for it but abandonment. It wasn't intentional, in most cases. Most birth mothers, as far as I know, would have done anything to keep their children. Society was, said that it was all good. And
well, we're into that rationalization, and there's you made a beautiful point in passing a couple of minutes ago. You made this distinction between the feeling and the rationalization.
Yeah, they're totally different things, but the feeling's true. The feelings are real and they must be processed.
Yeah.
The rationalization can help with the processing, I think.
So I want to go back. I want to go back to my when I had the eruption of anger towards the teddy bear, because just to ask for your opinion on this, because it goes directly to this point, right? So I said to, this is 15 years ago. I said to, so I'm not asking you this. You've already said that you're not a shrink, so I'm not asking
Right.
you for a shrink. I guess we're doing a peer-to-peer conversation.
We're just speaking adoptee to adoptee. Yeah.
So I said she didn't love me enough to keep me, and there was some swear words in there, right? Right. She gave me the what was the teddy bear? A consolation prize, right? And I didn't say it like that. I said it with a little bit more venom than that. And what she said to me was, I don't think I'm a mum, Simon, and I don't think that was quite true.
Mm. This is your therapist at the
No, it wasn't a therapist. She was just.
Who were you speaking to?
I was talking to a horse whisperer, actually. I was talking
a horse whisperer.
Yeah,
nice. Okay.
I was talking to a horse whisperer. But obviously highly sensitive, conscious individual, and she'd picked up on something that had happened at a training course that she ran for the day, a horse whispering training course. Communication skills with a horse whisperer, fascinating stuff. And as soon as she said that, I don't think you were quite. I'm a mum, Simon, and I don't think it was quite like that.
Yes.
My volcano of anger stopped. Right, but I described this as there was a little bit of white smoke coming out the top of the volcano. It wasn't completely extinct, but my eruption had gone. And I was sharing this story with a fellow adoptee a couple of weeks ago, and before I got to the fact that the eruption had stopped, she said, "Well, she was invalidating your feelings."
What the other adoptee was saying, that the horse whisperer was invalidating your feelings,
and I didn't feel it like that at all. She just said she was just giving her opinion on what a mother would think, and I guess I'm winding up to a question here, and I'm not quite sure what it is. Okay, so in adoptee groups, I see a lot of validation, and that validation can make us feel better, feel normalized. It can normalize what we've been through. It can normalize what people call the primal wound, and it doesn't always move us. It doesn't move us on.
I don't know. I mean, I can only speak for myself in terms of what helps me. It's I never felt abandoned. Although I was just telling you that my body apparently does. Whenever I'm under pressure, it does. I never had any ill feelings toward my birth mother. I always, implicitly understood that she did not, it was not a choice from her perspective. She would have kept me. I never doubt that she would have kept me if she had been able to. Which, could potentially have just been a line that my adopted mother fed me, but I swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. So I was never in any doubt that she would have done it if it was at all possible. Now, why it is that I knew that there could be a situation where it would not be possible to do such a thing, I don't know. I don't think I rationalized it that far. But so maybe I didn't have that, I didn't have any anger at her. And that was one of the things that with my birth mother before I met her, it was one of the things that kept her made her reluctant to search for me was this fear that I hated her and that I would not,
Wow.
you know, that I wouldn't want to see her. And she just didn't uh, think that she could put her, and that's a big thing. I mean, it's a big thing for adoptees. It's a hard thing for me too to decide finally to reach out for her. I did it in, just in my search was baby steps. I think I was in my early to mid 30s when I sent away for my non-identifying information, which is what I was allowed to, where I got the files which gave me my backstory. The social workers had collected in meetings, and then I sat on it, and I didn't go any further with that. And I recall, a conversation with the social worker where she said, "We have a phone number." At this point, it was 35 years old. She said, "I don't know if they'll still be there, but I can try if you want to call." And and I asked her, do they normally, does it normally work? Does this happen ever? And she said, "Well, I had one who I managed to reach them. I phoned the number on the file, and it was still good." And I said, "And did she want to meet?" And she said, "No, she just wanted to know that her child was all right." And then I said, "Probably not. Don't call." And the truth was that her mother was at that address, and that's later how I found her. But at that point, that was like 13 years later. And in between, my state, because the states control the access, had opened up the possibility of getting original birth certificates to certain adoptees in different ages. I was one of the fortunate ones who could apply and get my original birth certificate. And then I got her birth certificate, and that's when I looked for her, and I found her very quickly. I did a search of the local town assessors, and her mother still owns the house, and I wrote to them, and that's how I found her. But I was terrified that she was, that she wouldn't want to see me. And you think, my ego is okay. I can take it if she doesn't, I'm perfectly happy. But then there's that little part of you that says, I don't know for sure. It hasn't really happened to me. What would it feel like if someone, if this woman who I was convinced in my life wanted to see me, if I were to learn otherwise, that she didn't want to, to reunite with me, that would have been really hard. So I think it was like 10 or so days, because I was living in Belgium at the time, and I sent the letter off, and I just waiting to see if I was going to get anything returned. And when the email came in, and it said, and I could see on the tag, it was "Your letter to Lynn Wood." I just my heart was in my mouth as I clicked on it. It was and it was everything I wanted it to be. She was a lovely person. Sadly, she had already had ovarian cancer. When I met her, she was in like approaching 5 years into something that I realized is like the survival rate for 5 years is with ovarian cancer. It's stage 4 ovarian cancer is like, it's like 5% of people. So she was within the 5% of the people. So I got to have 18 months with her. But
Wow. So you were terrified, but you went through it anyway. That's
yeah, I did, because I kind of needed to. I'd gone so far at this stage. Um, I I couldn't, I'd already let it go. I mean, I think about it back, and I could have been with her 10 more years. If we could have had 10 more years of relationship, and 10 more years of relationship with my biological grandmother as well, who was still alive, who lived, I think, 6 months. I only met her once, but
yeah. I was terrified too, and I stopped my search. I pressed the pause button on my search for, I don't know, for 6 months, 9 months or something. And then I restarted. But I was terrified too. But I didn't want I didn't want to live with the terror. I was like, I'm not going to let this terror get the better of me. It was a strange thing, because I think I've often run away from things like that, but I ran towards it. I ran towards it.
Well, I mean, you deserve credit for courage on that side, because it is a scary thing. And I still, when it comes to my birth father, I mean, I know who he is, and I found him on Facebook. I didn't try and friend him, but he doesn't have his security features are not top of the range. He's not a great poster, I have to say. I haven't got a lot out of it, but I did. I mean, I mapped his brothers, the ex-wife, his current wife, his 2 kids. I've got the whole map of it all, and I did write to him eventually. I mean, it was all these things you're sort of like, not quite stalking, but it's not a certainly not. I haven't been upfront about him. So I decided I would write, and I never got a response. So he's not. And I have 2 half sisters who might want to know. And I'm on that next level of torn. I have 2 half sisters that are living. One who's a little bit older than me, another is a little bit younger than me, and maybe they'd want to know me. Maybe they would. Maybe they know I'm out there somewhere, and just can't. They don't have the connections that I have. Or maybe there's more. Maybe he has more, and maybe they don't. But do I go over? Bypass the father and take it into my own hand? I mean, they're all women in their 50s. Do they deserve to know that they have a half sister? Yeah, they do. But how will they react? Would they would it be circle the wagons with their father and push me out? What do you do? I'm still in that quandary. So it's just crazy. One quandary follows another in the adoption search.
I've got this thing I came up with a couple of years ago, or was it last year? I call it no-brainers. So unless I sorry, I'm not making much sense. I do stuff that's a no-brainer, and sometimes I find myself doing stuff. And that is freeing for me, because I don't overthink quite as much as I used to do. I wanted to draw you back to something that you said when we spoke this morning about you said that you didn't want to genderize, and you said that you felt that males tend to externalize the problem, and women tend to internalize problems. And I'm wondering how does that play out in adoption? How do you see that?
Okay, it is anecdotal, although as I think I said at the time that I have enough, but and I have another adopted friend, and who, like me, I have a brother and she has a brother who's adopted, very close, and we always joke about how, I think she talked about, this was like years ago, that there was an adoptee help group, self-help group, adoptees coming together, and she said, which of course is all women, because the men don't have any problems, do they? I think I think that in general, when I've met male adoptees, they don't like to talk about it as much. And I don't know if some of it is that sense too, that as women, even if we haven't had children, we certainly can understand the concept of carrying a child and giving birth to a child, and then the prospect of letting that child go. And I think intrinsically, most of us, the vast majority, I'm not trying to say every woman is maternal and wants to have children, but the process of growing a child inside you is pretty profound. It's very intimate, and um, and it's hard not to love them. It's not, you know, you know, and I just think that there's more of an understanding there. What does we can put ourselves in? I guess maybe we can just put ourselves in our mother's feet, feet so much more to understand what the pressures were, um, what they were up against, the challenges, and why they made the decision they made
Was
much more easily than men can, I think.
yeah,
In general.
I thought of I was listening to something this morning, and it reminded me of a poster I used to have on my wall when I was at college, at university, and it was the Cure, a band from the 80s. He's still going. He's still got the same haircut. The guy from the Cure. He looks a bit weird with it now, Robert Smith. But yeah, it was this fantastic black and white silhouette, an album cover or a single cover, and it's taken from behind the guitarist lead singer Robert Smith, and the track the title on the poster said "Boys Don't Cry."
Yeah.
So there's kind of that popped into my head as you
Sure, that I'm sure that's part of it too. Boys historically were not encouraged to feel their feelings, and certainly not to show them, you know. And that was considered yeah, admirable.
Did you know that the public schools were set up to educate, to desensitize the next generation of officers of the British Army, so that when they were going out into the empire and making havoc and doing unspeakable things, that's what the public schools desensitize them to that.
I didn't know that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Kind of
It does make a lot of sense that's the that was the model, that it was a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
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 So it's not
what does that mean in terms of internalizing the problem? Because you've talked about it in you said that women can, as a mass generalization, can see their birth mother's perspective. But
I think they can put themselves in their mother's. I think I said feet, but I meant shoes. Put themselves easily in their shoes, because even if you're not a super maternal person or see yourself as someone who wants lots of children or something, you still have that experience of being a woman in society. So you understand what the challenges are of everyday life, and the pressures, and what it would be like to have a child and things like that. I think that's probably a lot of it.
So the way I interpreted what you said about internalizing the problem, and when the way I saw that with adoptees who were women, right, were and I must have been, I don't know whether I was completely off on this, was what's wrong with me thing.
Yeah, well, that's a possibility as well. Oh, yeah. You're right. That's totally possible that it must be something we've done. Although we know that children tend to blame themselves as well too. I mean, like, children blame themselves for their parents' divorces and things like that. It's a natural thing. I think that happens to both genders. But yeah, you're right. There must be a lot of. I can't say that personally I felt there was something wrong with me, but also because I had this very firm feeling that, understanding that she expected to keep me, and was very surprised and heartbroken that she couldn't.
Yeah. So it all mixes in, doesn't it? My take was that normalization thing that you mentioned, the fact fairly early on in our first conversation, before we did the podcast, the chat we had this morning, was that normalization, the fact that you knew other adoptees, meant that yeah, it wasn't, I don't fit in.
Right.
You were, part of one
Yeah,
of
a
20
small,
rather than one of one.
right, exactly. Yeah. It was by no means unusual in my neighborhood and in my school and in my, yeah, in my parents' circle of friends and in, the sports that I did. There were a lot floating about at that time.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm
I
conscious
don't
of,
know if that was the case in the UK. I don't know if it was the same, you know.
um, yeah, I think it probably was. It was just maybe because of the shame thing. People didn't talk about it quite
Mm,
as much. If I
mm.
think back to now, how many how many kids did I know that were adopted? I don't know. It would be a couple, maybe. There
Yeah.
was, though. I think there was a kid at my school who was a bit of a, he had anger management issues, shall we say?
Mm, mm,
And he had an older brother who did some work with my dad, and he seemed pretty chilled out. And I think they were both adopted.
mm,
Other than that, and until my friend's girlfriend, I can't really
mm.
recall.
I
So
mean, I will say that, we didn't spend an awful lot of time talking about our adoption. It wasn't like we got together and
no,
chatted
no,
about being adoption. It was just, oh, I know they're
yeah,
adopted, they're adopted,
it,
yeah.
it was. We didn't in our household, we didn't speak much about adoption at all, but it was just, uh, I I literally hadn't had any thoughts about my birth mother.
Mm.
So
Really, none at all.
none at all.
Huh.
My
Not even
sister.
just general curiosity.
No,
Where did I
no,
get my nose?
no,
No.
no. I was no. Well, yeah, as you say, about blokes don't go to self-help groups. So maybe, who knows? Who knows? My and we talked about this about earlier, didn't we? About how um, bright people can make connections and look at the
Mm.
underpinnings and stuff like that, and what they do in legal dramas, and both sides, both lawyers
Yeah.
sound eminently plausible, but one
Yeah.
must be telling the truth. When I see that, I struggle, and I also find with some, when I talk to very bright people, they can make anything connect to anything.
Mm.
My take on my own stuff was that it wasn't repressed, really. It was just this. It became an issue when I was at a low ebb.
Yeah.
I was, and it was just so, why didn't they tell me? And also the context for our conversation about the teddy bear was anger. I'd had a I'd had a meltdown on this horse training course thing. So
But it was, it's the stress. I don't know, maybe it was just time. It was the time for you to discover it, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, one of those.
And everybody has their own time in which they do it. But I do think that the baby scoop era adoptees have a unique set of challenges in that most of us spent time in foster care. We didn't spend time with our mothers. We were removed, at birth or shortly thereafter. It was still, I don't know when natural childbirth came back into a thing, but I thought it was like late 60s, early 70s. I mean, my birth mother was out. They drugged her up, and she, and they induced her as well because they were afraid that she would go into labor too far away from the hospital and end up having to go to the local hospital, and then the truth would be out because she was in hiding. Her mother's friends thought she was in Boston, and she was, yeah. So
Yeah,
she was induced and then knocked out, and then she woke up. I mean, talking to her about it, it's a little heartbreaking, but talking about it with her afterwards, she talked about how when they checked her into the hospital, they'd put her bracelet and then a tiny little, like, infant bracelet, newborn bracelet, on the bracelet. So and when she woke up, she was like tied to the bed, which made her feel like a criminal. But I think they did it then because probably to all women, because, you know, when you wake up from a anesthesia, you can thrash about and fall out and stuff. So I'm sure that was why it was. But for her, given the shame she was under, it just felt like, you know, she was a criminal. And she looked on the bracelet and saw that it was gone. The little bracelet was gone. And then she knew I was gone.
Wow.
Which just,
Yeah.
it's awful, you know? I mean, again, I'm bringing all of my feelings as a mother myself into this. And I just think it was a terrible thing to do to a 22-year-old woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but where were we? We're
Yeah.
off.
I think
I drag subjects. I
no,
drag people off subjects always.
it's fascinating stuff. I think, you know, to draw those those profound things together that you've just, you know, what it seems to me is that by bringing stuff out into the open, out of the darkness of the shame, that seems to be what helps us move on, right? You know,
I think so. I mean, it's, you know, we did talk about this earlier this morning, is that, you know, in the US they give you a new birth certificate, that your birth certificate, the original birth certificate with the name you're given and your parents, or at least your mother's name, is on it. That gets, I mean, it's in most states, it varies from state to state, but in the vast majority of states, that becomes like a top secret, ultra secret document, you know, of the type that were stored in, you know, that were found in Mar-a-Lago, you know, nobody can see it, you know. Uh, and it has no expiry date. And it was supposedly to free us adoptees from the burden, the stigma, the stain of our birth, so that we could live happy lives as regular human beings, which I guess sounds, you know, which sounds admirable. It's a good thing. I mean, children shouldn't be carrying a stain just for existing. But at the same time, what we should do that is just not stigmatize people based on their birth, as opposed to instead, oh, we'll hide it. We'll hide it all and it'll all be okay. And to have the state, you know, contributing to this is just an outrage, that, you know, that they're willfully keeping this information. It's and so a little bit of exposure, yeah. I mean, especially when you look at reality now, how many children in Britain are born, quote unquote, out of wedlock? I mean, you know, it's got to be somewhere around 30%, I'd be willing to guess, you know, at least 30%. The parents aren't married.
yeah. I heard, I haven't heard that particular stat. I don't know that particular stat, but somebody told me it's flipped it around. So in terms of 19, when I was born, 67, 99% or 95% of babies born to single mums were adopted.
Right.
And now it's 5%. It's flipped around.
Yeah, absolutely. And what used to be, I mean, for a woman to have a baby out of wedlock was amongst the most shameful things that they could ever do. And now it's you know, as I said, it's got to be at least 30%, and it's probably closer to 50% of live births in Britain, you know, are born to women who are not married.
Yeah.
And we're all okay with that. But for the people, you know, who our age, who were born in this time where we were this, you know, we were the shameful things and therefore needed to be covered up and lied to, we didn't get that sort of, like, we're, you know, it's like, I think my mother had talked about like limbo. They got rid of limbo in the Catholic Church. And she always wondered, she's like, what happened to those people who were in limbo? Did they get out when it went away, or what happened? You know, it's like we're still stuck in limbo, where we are, our records are still treated as if it were still a shameful thing. And
the we talked about again we talked about that sort of thing this morning. Like I get I get the feeling that there's a lot of anger around this stuff. Like some people are very angry about it, and
sure, I think there is a lot of anger in the adoptee community, and I don't, I think a lot of it stems from the experience, whatever experience that they've had, the journey that they've traveled that's made them angry. And um, you know, there are, because there was this idea that, they were taking these babies from, you know, uh, mothers who were unfit. And then they were going to place them by virtue of the fact that these people were married, they were going to do a better job. And they were just more human beings. And some of them got divorced, some of them were abusive, some of them had crazy thoughts, that didn't, some, and for those people, for people who were in those homes, people who were narcissists or something, I mean, just as any parent you could end up with any of it. The sheer factor of being married does not make them necessarily a superior parent. Yeah. And, I think a lot of them are carrying some pretty heavy scars.
Yeah.
And bless them, it's
indeed.
It's a lot.
You see, if it's I don't know. Is it the worse our experience, the more we rail against it, the system, I guess. That must be it, because I don't really rail. I don't feel any rail. Well, I don't feel the need to change the system or rail against it. I just want to kind of like, I see my lane as what I can control, which is my self-awareness, my stuff in. I focus on me.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good thing to do. But there are, I mean, I think that the adoption industry, and I always make an underline that it is an industry, and sadly, human babies are the product of that industry, and I have real issues with that. I think and I think that there is a lot of man, they're selling the impulse to have a child. If you cannot, it was, if you are not able to conceive naturally, it is a heartbreaking situation. And they sell adoption as this, on one side, this very brave and courageous choice by the birth mother, and to the hopeful adoptive families, they sell it as this solution, and quite often they're bringing fate, the cosmos, God, in there, God's plan into the mix, about how you're going to create this happy family, and everything's, and it's, somebody's making money off it. It drives me crazy, and the fact that they have the states, the government on the, putting their finger on the scale, helping them to do stuff is an outrage. But and I can understand why a lot of people are upset about it. And I had a very happy childhood, very, very happy childhood. And quite often, I would say on Twitter, I've spent a lot of time on adoptee Twitter. I don't comment that often, but I do spend a lot of time, and I read a lot about it. Anyone who makes a comment where they criticize the adoption industry, or adoption in general, people, quite often, either social workers who work in adoption or adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents, will say, if somebody criticizes it, well, that's not everyone's experience. And they say, well, I'm speaking for myself as an adult adoptee. And they'll be like, well, you're just bitter. And, and it just, and I think there's that fury that builds up in a lot of adoptees, where this is not their first rodeo. It's that don't kill the messenger. It's not my fault. I am an adult adoptee. And one of the major frustrations, I can say from my perspective, is this whole setup they talk about, what did they talk about? It's it's not a trifecta, it's the triad or something like that, which is supposed to be the baby, the adoptive parents, and the birth parents. That's what they're supposed to be about. And primary amongst them all, in theory, is the baby. And that's it. It's baby, right? Because we're forever the baby. We never get to grow up. We never have our own agency and our own thoughts and our own, volunty, sorry, that's me throwing a French word in there, our own sort of desires. It's much more convenient for the whole of it to continue to work if we stay the infant. And that's incredibly frustrating, especially when you're getting lectured to by prospective adoptive parents who, given I'm postmenopausal, are younger than me. It's always it's that infantilization of the person that is extremely frustrating. And they probably, then maybe it triggers, and now I'm really going off into pop psychology. Maybe it triggers the same feelings that I get when I'm under pressure, and it gets people to rage, and they come off like sounding like harpies, and then everybody ignores them for that. Yeah, it's not a winning situation, is it?
It's not. So what's the question that I've not asked you that you'd like me to ask, or the thing?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Well, you talked about being at peace with the unknown.
Yeah.
Can we tackle that, since you're talking about, about thriving?
Thriving, yeah. Oh yeah, this is a bit, this is deep. You'll like this. Maybe if I can find it. I had a I binned it. No, I'm gonna this is from my favorite speaker, author guy at the moment, a guy called Rupert Spira. Happiness is to align what we want with what is. Unhappiness is the attempt to align what is with what we want. So
yeah, that's the Stoics, isn't it? Yeah, that's the Stoics. And I am quite a fan of Stoicism, which is the idea of doing the best you can where you are with the tools that are available.
Yeah.
And as far as, I think that's a view, an outlook on for me that I carry through on everything. But it's also applicable to the adoption. Yeah. I think I try to assume that everyone who is there, the triad, was doing the best they could where they were with the tools they had available. The scars or whatever, the trauma that I suffered all came from the best of intentions. The fact we know better now doesn't change that that's what they thought. They were wrong. They're doing better now, I hope.
Yeah.
And as far as that doesn't mean you don't fight, doesn't mean you don't still try to get, I think adoptees should have access to their original birth certificates. They should have access to their family histories. It's incredibly important. I mean, thank God I found my birth mother, because she had ovarian cancer, as I said, stage 4. And her grandmother also had it. And so, although I don't think she didn't test positive for BRCA1 or 2, but as a result, I went through, after menopause, I had a partial hysterectomy because hers started in the fallopian tubes, which is where it mostly starts. And hopefully I've dodged it because of that, but I never would have known that. There's some hypertension and other stuff. When you come in as an adoptee, you kind of think you're a blank slate, don't you? Because you don't know the history. You got somewhere in your subconscious, you kind of think, well, there is no history. I think Steve Jobs was definitely, prey to that to that illusion. You think you make it all. You're generation one, but we're not. So they should have that access. So you do fight that, but we're doing the best we can with where we are, with the tools we have available.
Brilliant. Susan, it's been a pleasure. As always, listeners, check out the show notes and the links to the socials and the authors' books and the websites that we put on. I'm going to link to Susan's work here, and check out what she's doing, because there's some very interesting stuff. You've got you were talking this morning about the fact your novel allows you to get into other people's heads far deeper than the memoirs do. So this is a different way of exploring adoption through a novel. So I'd encourage your listeners to check out what Susan's doing. And thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Thanks a lot, listeners. We will speak to you again very soon. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.